Yo, what the hell's up? Welcome back to Reviews with Jake, where I just got done watching Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City. Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City is based on the first two entries of the very popular survival horror video game franchise. We follow a group of survivors, both civilians and trained professionals, going through a zombie outbreak from a very questionable pharmaceutical company. That generic-ass synopsis makes me sound like someone that does not give a rat's ass about the source material, but that could not be any further from the truth. I have wavered with my relationship with video games over the years. Once upon a time, many moons ago, I would consider myself current with video games, but that ship has long sailed since then. I play 2, maybe 3 new releases a year, and that's maximum for sure, and I followed that trend for several years now. Most of the new releases that I do play are coming from franchises that I trust, and there are no franchises that I trust more than The Legend of Zelda and Resident Evil. I love Resident Evil games. I could and have picked up and replayed those games over and over and over throughout the course of my life. My familiarity with Resident Evil 4 is just sad. I can play and I know where every single Ganado is. I know when there's one hiding around the corner. There is no suspense, no surprise, no scary, no nothing, but I still find it so fun. However, that fun, that love that I have for the franchise, the games, does not translate to any of the movies that we've gotten so far. I could open up this review with the longest prologue I've ever given, just ripping apart and hating the hell out of all of the Paul W.S. Anderson Resident Evil films. I think it would be very therapeutic if I did that, but I know you already know that they are shit. And it's not even like they could say to me, "That's fine, just play the games then if the movies aren't for you." Yeah, except for that very same awfulness that the movies were comprised of. That Matrix with zombies action fest started to bleed into the video games for a couple of years. Remember Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6? Chris punching boulders? What the hell was that? Thankfully, the video games refound their way, their path to survival horror once again, but the movies never did, and thankfully they stopped. They mercifully stopped in 2016. How did they end? I have no idea. I checked out on those films long before they checked out on those films, but I held on a lot longer than I should have because I kept buying in, listening to and believing them every time they said, "Fans of the games are going to be really happy with this one because we followed them really closely here." No, you most certainly are not and never did. You blew up the world, created a desert wasteland like Mad Max. That never happened in the video games. There's no coming back from that. Sorry, going off on a tangent after all. I'm just saying, those movies were ass. But here we are, back at the top, back at the beginning of the story, the origin of evil. Could it really be any worse than what we've gotten thus far? That's the question. Well, let's just start at the top with the pro that kind of over-encompasses all of the other pros, and that is the tone of this movie. While the Anderson films were really action-packed, stylish, really bright, this movie darkened things up again where they should be. Dark to the point that it was almost at its detriment, because honestly, it's tough to kind of make heads or tails of what's going on through large portions of this movie. It's real dark. Still, while it's not ideal for a viewing experience, I do think that it's a little bit more on brand for a Resident Evil experience. In the games, you get fixed camera angles set at the end of a corridor. Your character's walking down the hallway away from the camera. You approach a T intersection, and you don't know that there is a zombie sitting around the corner because your camera does not change until the very last second. If you were in first-person view or an over-the-shoulder camera angle, the zombie would be no problem around the corner, but because of that lack of visibility, that kind of makes it that much more horrifying. And horrifying was something I felt like this film was actually trying to achieve. Unlike the Anderson films, I didn't see a single martial arts fight, or a slow-motion punch, kick, or a bullet flying through the air. I felt like it all stayed on brand as it should. This film possessed all of the seriousness, the dark atmosphere that I would want from a true Resident Evil movie. It doesn't feel like that's such a difficult thing to ask for, but for some reason, Paul W.S. Anderson could not get it right. This dark, brooding mood was reinforced by a solid soundtrack. Some of it sounded like stuff you'd hear in the games, other stuff sounded like departures from it, but still somehow stayed within that realm, within that brand. No Marilyn Manson, no Charlie Clouser, even though I do appreciate the scores that each of them create, I just never thought that it sounded very Resident Evil-y. What was also great were the practical effects, particularly the prosthetics, the makeup, and the blood. Resident Evil is all about zombies, mutilation, mutations, body horror, and this film captures all of that. The zombies were grotesque, the gore and mutilation was ample, a lot of the creatures, the nightmare-fueled monsters that the Resident Evil franchise possesses look like they should. There were a handful of times where the little kid in me looked up at the screen and said, "Yes, there it is, on the big screen. And the fact that a lot of it was done without CGI, they did it practically, that's awesome, I loved it. What also made the kid in me really giddy were the set designs, because they really just put all of these very iconic locations from the video games truly under a microscope. The RPD and the mansions both look just like they do in the video games. Obviously the main halls of both are super iconic, but the smaller rooms that are branching off of those in both of those locations, they also look good too. I feel like when the production team was getting ready to rebuild these environments, they would just fire up the game, just log in as Claire or Chris in either of the first two games and just walk around and admire all of the small, tiny details in every room. And again, I really appreciate that. I felt like the people that made this movie actually gave a shit. And while this film is not perfect at all, I feel like that alone lets me kind of look over, maybe look past some of the shortcomings, at least to a certain extent. I feel like they didn't make important decisions willy-nilly. Everything had to look right. That was important to them, and that's pretty cool. However, that being said, not everything about this movie is very cool. In fact, there is a lot that is not. Before I dive into the official list of cons, I do want to address the elephant in the room. The liberties that were taken, the changes to the story, the characters, the creatures' personal attributes. They made a lot of changes to the original source material from the first two games, and I disagreed with most of those decisions. That being said, I'm not going to lob that in with the cons, because sometimes changes are made to adaptations that actually improve the overall story, and I feel like in those cases, credit doesn't get passed around as it should, so I feel like it can't go both ways. I feel like really it comes down to execution. Like when you go into movies like this, you have to wipe your slate completely clean, especially in movies like this, where they are taking the source material and basically throwing it out the window. You need to erase all the prior knowledge that you had going in about all of the things, the story, characters, everything. I caught on very early on throughout this film to know that they are changing a lot of shit, and I accepted it. I did not like it, but I accepted it for the sake of viewing this film and trying to embrace all of the things that they are presenting me. So with that in mind, the characterization in this film was awful. All of the characters in this movie just felt like they blended together in a weird cliche soldier gumbo. None of them really stood out from each other. In fact, Leon is probably going to be the most divisive thing because he's just a bumbling idiot. And while I did not agree with that decision to make him so uncoordinated and unreliable, the butt of every joke, at least he brought something new to the table from the rest of the group. At least it was something different. The backstories, the relationships, the betrayals, the twists and the turns, none of it feels earned. None of it has any emotional weight. It could all just blow away with a brisk wind. If you're gonna divert what people are expecting from these characters walking in, you have to give us something to supplement that. These do not feel like the characters that we all know and love. They feel like generic ass avatars of these characters that we know nothing about. Stemming off of that, normally I feel like I can differentiate between bad writing and bad acting. And while yes, it would be very easy for me to say, okay, I've seen these actors and actresses and other things before. I know they're talented, so if they can bring it, it must be the writing. But I don't think the talent here is innocent. I really enjoyed this cast on paper. I've seen these people in a lot of other things and I know they're good, but these performances in this movie were just not good. Emotionless, dull, flat delivery. There were so many times in this movie that my face was just calling for my palm, which, to play devil's advocate, is also on brand for Resident Evil. A lot of the earlier entries in the franchise, the voice acting in those games is not good, and it did not age well over time. But I just simply cannot buy that it was bad by design, that the terrible acting was there as some sort of tribute to the original source material. If they ever tried to tell me that, I would be like, no, that is a total scapegoat. If you're going into this movie changing as much as this movie changes, you are going to update that. Like, that is the most critical thing of all. The dialogue in this film stemming right off of that was so poorly written. None of it sounded natural. It sounded like two aliens pretending to be humans talking to each other to try and blend in. And the exposition, my god, I know that I complain about exposition dumps a lot in my reviews, but this might be among the worst case of it I have ever seen. The iconic truck driver driving into Raccoon City with Claire Redfield. He turns to her and says, "What are you going to Raccoon City for? Did you say you're going to see your brother?" Dude just answered his own question. That is blatant exposition, and this film is riddled with things like that. This movie crams 2 full video games worth of information while simultaneously adding whole exchanges and conversations all built around giving us an Easter egg or a reference just for us fans to laugh at. There's just so much in this film crammed into less than 2-hour runtime, and none of it feels natural at all. What also does not look natural is when they abandoned the practical effects for the zombies and the monsters and they went with CGI. The CGI they had here was, well, yikes. I get that this film did not possess a massive budget. Obviously, with a smaller budget, there are limitations, but what's not good is still not good. Same with some of the production decisions that they made, the treatments that they used to apply to some of the action sequences. Sometimes it's too much handheld cinematography, which is really disorienting in large doses. Other times they're disorienting you with a lot of crazy things they're doing with the lighting during an action sequence. I'm gonna avoid spoilers there, but I feel like that particular sequence almost gave me a seizure. All in all, if you are not a fan of the Resident Evil games, avoid this movie like the plague. There is nothing for you here. If you are a fan, well, it's still pretty bad, but I think it's at least better than what we've gotten thus far. I think ultimately it comes down to the decision to try and squeeze both the first and second games into one movie. I think that decision was really the kill shot. It's basically a highlight reel. It skims over a lot of really awesome stuff that happens in that 2-game window that we will never get in future films, at least we shouldn't. I realize it never stopped Paul W.S. Anderson, who just took any character, any monster, any event, anything, and just threw them anywhere in the timeline because he didn't give a damn. So maybe they might do some stuff out of order. I did see that Anderson's name was under the executive producers of this film, something I did not know going into it before the ending credits rolled. That kind of bummed me out a little bit, but honestly, if I'm being frank, I don't think I want to see any more from this rendition of Resident Evil. There is a post-credit scene. They introduce a few threads and ideas that could possibly lead to something in a future film, but honestly, if this film couldn't get the first 2 right, why would I have any confidence in a future film? Which sucks, because I really wanted to like this movie, and it really pains me that I didn't. I'm going to give Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City a C-. Ugh. To be clear, my C- is coming from a Resident Evil fan's perspective, which I am. If I was not, this would be like a D, maybe worse. It was a valiant effort, legitimate good try. I'm happy you took a bite, but I'm sorry it just did not work. But that's just me. What do you guys think? Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments below. And make sure to subscribe to this channel to stay up to date. New reviews coming real soon. Stay safe. Thanks for checking in.